Do you see this number? It kinda looks as if I just copy and pasted something accidentally on the screen. For the layman, those unfamiliar with software, this appears to just be a jumbled mess. For those more accustomed to gaming software and computers, this is a patch, a version. Typically when looking at the bottom piece of a software, you will see a number like this one, indicating what version you are currently using. Thankfully, League of Legends is much easier on the eyes when it comes to this regard. As always, it's just the season number, which is season 9, and what patch of the year we are on, such as the 14th patch, patch 9.14. Simple. However, it wasn't always this way, and this number, version 1.0.0.152, is a pivotal time in League of Legends history. This would be the patch to launch Season 3. So many things, good and bad, came about because of these changes. Nami was released on this patch, who is arguably the coolest enchanter and my girl Marie's favorite champion and her main. Besides, how can you beat that laugh spam?
Yeah. Yeah.
We saw the Black Cleaver patch, which was the single strongest item to ever be released, causing massive uproar and backlash, making the community ask themselves and ask Riot, what on earth were they thinking? We saw the jungle changes and quality of life buffs to junglers, allowing leashing to be much easier to execute and better for them as a whole. This was also the patch that we saw Hunter's Machete introduced to the game, allowing more jungle champions than ever before to be viable. While a lot of the changes on this patch were great, quite interesting, and it will most likely go down in history as probably the most all-time important patch in League of Legends, I have to say, given the sheer size of the patch, just looking at how many items alone were changed and introduced to the game on that day, one item change stands above the rest: the changes to Deathfire Grasp. DFG was not added into the game with the launch of Season 3. It was changed. To begin our story, we have to go back even further in time. Really far. To October 1st, 2009. Nearly a decade ago, on version 0.9.25.24, Nasus, the Brutalizer, and Deathfire Grasp were added to League of Legends. It was added into the game, but due to League of Legends going through a pretty big transition period while trying to launch the game officially, it was actually removed for about 2 months and then reintroduced in December later that year. When it was re-added on December 2nd, 2009, it was here to stay. The original recipe involved a Cage's Lucky Pick, a Fiendish Codex, and 600 gold. It had 15% CDR, 65 ability power, 15 mana regen per 5 seconds, and it's active. The original active dealt magic damage to a target champion equal to 25% of their current health, and that percentage scaled 3% per 100 ability power, with a minimum of 200 damage, and it had a 60-second cooldown. For the recipe, it built out of a Cage's Lucky Pick, which was actually a gold generation item, and that was eventually the rework into Frostfang, which is the AP support item. Cage's gave 25 AP and 5 gold per 10 seconds. It was also fairly cheap, only having a cost of 765, so eventually the item did kinda pay for itself. Fiendish Codex is still in the game today, but is a shadow of its former self. Fiendish back then was actually very similar to what we have in the game today, which is Lost Chapter. Back then, it was 1245 gold, gave 30 AP, 7 flat mana regen, and 10% CDR, which is extremely close to what Lost Chapter does today. When DFG was added, it was meant to be a tank-busting item for mages. At the time, there was no Liandry's, and of course, nothing like Conqueror that gives true damage that even AP champions like Sylas can now take. All that any mages could ever build was Void Staff, but the good part about DFG is that it also gave some CDR and mana regen, which is something that was a luxury back in the day. Right now, all of us are used to every champion in the game having pretty much 40% CDR. It's possible to get 35 CDR every single game just from your runes, taking the Minor Rune, Transcendence, and Cosmic Insight. Back then, a legitimate and real cast-in build was Rod of Ages, Archangels, Zanyas, Void Staff, Deathcap, and Sorcerer's Shoes. That's a legit build. But because Archangels did not give CDR back then, and because Zhonya's didn't give CDR, that cast and build has no CDR at all. None. Mages such as Orianna or Syndra back in seasons 2 through 5 typically were going Athene's first item into a Deathcap second, sometimes though skipping Athene's altogether and just relying on blue buff and going straight into Deathcap. Most items didn't give you 40% CDR at 15 minutes like we have now. Within a few patches of Deathfire Grasp being in the game, it was seen as pretty darn good, as it was a genuinely good tank busting item. It was nerfed only 2 patches after it was added, right around the beginning of 2010. It was given another small rework later on down the road, changing the recipe to build out of a blasting wand, and the item became fairly cheap, only costing 2600 gold. The AP was increased, but the mana regen was removed. Showing how much Riot really didn't know what on earth they wanted to do with the item, once again it was reworked slightly and changed around, only 6 months later. The cooldown reduction was completely removed, its active base damage was reduced, and its AP ratio was increased. This was in an attempt to make players not be able to rush it as a first or a second item, rather completing it as a luxury item in a 4th, 5th, or 6th slot well after their death cap. They knew that this was not healthy for the item, and they had some serious issues getting it done correctly. From its release up until the item's rework in Season 3, at one point it had its cooldown reduction changed and then removed, its mana regeneration changed and then removed, the ability power changed, the ability power ratios changed, the base damage changed, the recipe changed, and the cost changed. The item was always finding a way to get some changes. To Riot's hope, this would be the last time they would ever consider needing to rework DFG with the launch of Season 3. And boy, were they wrong. As we said, this was a monumental patch, but with the introduction of DFG, mages were in for a treat. The new recipe was simple, really simple in fact. Large Rod, Amp Tome, 965 gold. Simple. AP plus money equals this thing. It was 3k gold, gave 100 AP and 15% CDR on completion, rather than anywhere in the build path, which I do actually think is a healthy way to balance an item. Similar to how today's Lost Chapter items only give you 10% until you complete the full item at 20%, you only get the CDR once it's fully complete with this version of DFG. Finally, it was given a new active called Doom. Doom was a debuff that did 15% of a target champion's maximum health in magic damage, then it amplifies all magic damage they take by 20% for 4 seconds, only on a 1-minute cooldown. The item would finally settle down on the changes, and in one of its final versions on patch 3.02, which was the second patch of Season 3, it would end up costing 3100 gold, only give 10% CDR instead of 15, but it would also be in line with Deathcap and Zhonya's at the time, joining the 120 AP club. This item was known for doing many things. The stats were solid even without the active. But the active, of course, was incredibly broken on certain champions such as LeBlanc, Ahri, and Veigar. The other thing is that Doom also increased magic damage from all sources, not just your own. So if you had a Vladimir top lane and a Veigar mid lane, both with Deathfire Grasp, increasing each other's damage with the item, there wasn't really any counterplay. Like, at all. Ahri was quite notorious with the item for a few reasons. Because of the damage amplification on her charm, and of course the damage amp on the item, to be perfectly honest, literally getting hit by one charm, just one, might be game over. Seriously. If she hits one charm, which leads to one guaranteed kill, which leads to a guaranteed snowball, and of course, then leading to more kills. Ahri's kit was never designed with this in mind, and with the item's removal, Riot pretty much sums up exactly why the item was a problem. They hit the nail on the head in the patch notes by saying, imagine how hard it is to balance Ahri when she's able to one-shot you and is only required to use one cast of her ultimate. She can use the other two to always escape. Veigar, however, by far was the single best user of the item. Veigar's Q back then was also a point-and-click spell, but could only hit one target. The modern two-target thing and a skill shot was a result of a rework that he received later on. The champion had 3 point-and-click undodgeable nukes: his Q, his R, and DFG. The combo was to start with DFG, then Q and R with the damage amplification. Back then, Veigar's R also scaled with your AP. It was not an execute like it is today, so you weren't really punished for using your R when they're nearly at full HP. So, in a matter of less than 1 second, you were guaranteed, not just likely, but guaranteed to be blown up. Considering the fact that his entire kit was able to blow you up unless your champion could build some MR, there was no getting out of his point-and-click destruction. And if you think the first 2 examples were problematic, let's talk about another one, LeBlanc. So, during Season 3, I want you to realize something. LeBlanc, yes, this one, not a character from Dota or a mobile game MOBA, League of Legends, had a silence. Yes, yeah, back in Season 3, assassins had silences. Talon, LeBlanc, and Kassadin all had silences in their kit. So let me clear the air for you. LeBlanc, who could already one-shot you without the item active, could jump on you, silence you so you literally cannot flash or heal away as an ADC, you cannot cast any spells, then she uses DFG, point and click, QR, and blows you up, then uses her W to go back where she came from and gets away. A champion could literally one-shot you, literally with 0 counterplay since you're silenced, and literally live without a scratch because she could always jump right back to her distortion. DFG also had a little brother that was in store for the Twisted Tree line and Dominion. I have to say, this is one of my favorite item arts, and it sounds really cool. Blackfire Torch. This item was 2650 gold, but it also gave less AP. It was a mini version of DFG for the other game modes, and the active was basically the same and of equal power, except for the fact that the damage wasn't instant on the active, but it happened over 4 seconds. So it technically had a little bit more counterplay considering you could heal or barrier the damage since it was over time rather than instantly, but it was still good. Up until the removal of DFG on patch 5.2, everyone knew the item was a problem. There was a makeshift nerf increasing the item's active cooldown to 90 seconds, but it didn't really make a difference. Riot had even stated themselves in those patch notes that yeah, we're looking to make some big changes to the item. By now, it's quite understandable to see the logic behind the removal. There were too many situations that would cause a vicious cycle, as they said. Either they nerf Ahri, which causes her to rely even more heavily on the item, or they nerf the item, which would require potentially some buffs to Ahri, or it makes the item worthless, maybe even both. The only way to bring balance to the champions is to allow them to not rely so heavily on the items that bring them such power. For a while after its removal on 5.2, mages were in a pretty bad spot because it took a while for Riot to introduce another 120 AP item as a replacement. The replacement item would end up being Luden's Echo. This replacement caused a lot of controversy at first because Luden's was just straight overpowered on release. Echo, building Luden's Echo in Season 5, was crazy OP and had insane burst. Luden's would end up receiving several changes and nerfs throughout the years, and then finally with the Mage update, it's a mana item that gives 20% CDR and lost a lot of its AP. Even junglers these days have a version of Luden's, which is Runic Echoes. The most interesting part about the story of Deathfire Grasp is that it was truly an item that was never balanced. There was never a time, even back in 2009, that it was close to perfect. The amount of changes and reworks that the item went through, you may as well call it the rise of items. But the thing is, League has done the same. As a whole, I mean. League has gone through thousands upon thousands of changes and has reworked nearly 60 champions. So who's to say that DFG couldn't have found a place given a bit more time? If you really think about it, is getting one-shot by a DFG Veigar or Ahri really any more or less fair than a Dark Harvest Karthus jungle, both who have point and click and have little to no counterplay? Considering that Karthus R is global, what can you do against Karthus ganks who ganks from his own blue buff? Is DFG really any more or less fair than Gunblade? Gunblade's active does really good damage, and while it doesn't amplify damage on that target, it does have a slow and healing, and champions like Akali and Katarina spike incredibly, disgustingly hard on their Gunblade, similar to how mages did with DFG. In today's League of Legends, there are more shields and heals than ever before. Unlike the days where the support was just a walking sack of 300 gold ready to be chain killed, back then, Lux didn't have Guardian or Aftershock, a 700 shield, Bone Plating, Revitalize, Ardent, Athenes, and a Redemption. Back then, you didn't stand a chance. I do believe that if they were to put it back in the game today, it may not even be OP anymore. It's actually on the Nexus Blitz game mode, and we've been seeing people use it. I almost feel like they'd rather build other items such as a Deathcap, a Ludens, a Void, and a Morello. But alas, it probably will never see a return to League of Legends. And that's why it will forever be an iconic item. Rest in peace, DFG.